So, modern scripture scholarship has much to do about the fact that there seem to be two different versions of the account of creation in Genesis, which just makes me want to puke, because their academic conclusions may be true, but they're supremely unhelpful in recognizing what we need to know. The fact is that both accounts of creation, or both aspects of creation, the creation account, both emphasize different things in different ways, and they're all important for us to understand. So we're going to continue with what is called the second creation account today in Genesis 2. And the first thing to note is that God creates Adam out of the slime of the earth and breathes into him what is more literally translated from the Hebrew as the breath of the living ones. He becomes a living being. And in fact, a deeper exegesis of this passage, of the grammar of this passage, and I don't understand the grammar myself, so I'm just passing on what I've learned, is that the way it is spoken of Adam becomes his own agent in keeping himself alive. That's what God gives him by breathing this breath of the living ones into him. As long as he was faithful, he would have access. Sorry, no, that's not that point yet. Okay, so he has he is his own agent, keeping himself alive in the power that God's given him in this breath. Now, we then are told about the two trees, which everyone is familiar with: the tree of life and the tree of good and evil. The reason for the two trees is that Adam has to have a choice. When we see trees in the scriptures, we always want to remember that many of them are types of the cross, which would be the tree of life. We also see this tree of knowing good with evil, which is a better translation of, it's not just good and evil, it's knowing good with evil. And that's going to be really important in a moment. As long as Adam is faithful, he has access to the tree of life, which maintains his life. But to introduce evil with good is a corruption and would inhibit Adam from maintaining his life as he was created to. Evil is a privation of the good, and therefore we should not want to experience evil with good. Now, Genesis tells us that a river goes out of Eden, and it might be easy to overlook this, except for the fact that this points to two very important things that are actually throughout all of the scriptures. As you know from your geography, rivers are going to flow downhill, which means that if it is flowing out of Eden, that Eden is at an elevation. It is a mountain. And the authoritative Hebrew tradition is that Adam was buried on a mountain, which his friend Methuselah would have known the location of, and made known to Noah and his son Shem, otherwise known as Melchizedek, who would have shared that with Abraham, etc., etc. The place being called the place of the skull in Hebrew, Golgotha, which is on the same mountain on which the temple was built. After the destruction of Solomon's temple, Ezekiel is given a vision of a new temple from which a river is flowing, which gives life, and this same one is seen by St. John in his apocalyptic vision of heaven. So there is a connection here pointing to the fact that Eden is in what we would call Jerusalem now, Mount Zion, also Mount Moriah, where Abraham was asked to sacrifice Isaac, etc., 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 leading all the way to heaven. That connection is extremely important for us to understand what Eden is. Now, Adam is placed in the garden, and he is told he must dress and keep it. There are two important lessons here, one of which Dr. Bergsma points out that these words in the original Hebrew are very rarely used together, and that the next two times that they are used together in the scriptures is to refer to the Levitical priesthood of Aaron and his sons, and their work in the tabernacle, which was the portable temple. And so what Adam is given is a liturgical role. We referred to that last week a little bit, but this idea of liturgical work being tied to creation in Eden is very important, which makes Adam a kind of priest. But even in a more general way, we see the fact that we are here to work. The only difference is that thanks to sin, work has become difficult. But work is still something of God and part of the role of why we're here. Now, God commands Adam not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowing good with evil. There's two things we can see here. One is that law is of divine origin, and then if we understand what these exegetical points are that I've been bringing up about the fact that it is not good to know evil with good, etc., the fact that God is merely trying to preserve Adam from evil and to only let him experience what is good, then we see that his law is a loving one. We also see in these two trees and in this command freedom, that you are not free if you do not have an option. If you do not have a choice, there is no freedom. And because we were created for love, there had to be a choice. We had to have free will. Now, after Adam is created, God observes that it is not good for the man to be alone. And this is the first time in creation when things are not good. If you recall from the first chapter of Genesis, God sees what he has made and it is good. This is repeated all throughout the days of creation. This verse is extremely essential to consider. It is very rare that one is able to live a holy and a sane life completely alone. Prior to the last century, for example, priests would never have been assigned by themselves. And I'm saying these examples because you think, well, you always imagine these saints by themselves or holy people by themselves. It is not the case. Priests were never assigned alone. The apostles and disciples were sent out 2 by 2. And even religious live in a community. Even hermits, when they live in their own little huts, live close to others so that there is at least some community there. Only those who are the most advanced in the spiritual life can safely be completely by themselves. And that's the ancient teaching of the spiritual masters of the church. Loneliness is one of the most common ailments that people experience. And I'm speaking of this from lots of personal experience. As a parish priest and as a confessor, I see this at the root of so many psychological and spiritual problems. The devil is a divider and loves keeping people apart. Ironically, social media, the internet, and mobile phones have only actually made things worse, because while they give people the false impression that they're connected, when in reality there is a lack of true intimacy most of the time. Especially younger people, most people, but especially young people, lack intimate relationships and feel lonely. It's not enough to be around people. You can't assume that someone is not feeling alone simply because they're always around people. Again, being around someone is not actual intimacy necessarily. So, we want to be very cognizant of this. We all need this connection, and it should start at the home, but should also include the church. And especially when it's not being found at home, that makes the church more important, because if you don't have it at home or church, you're going to get it in other places where it's going to be very damaging. I cannot emphasize this enough. I don't just mean for the young people. There's a lot of this at all ages, but particularly for young people because of how damaging it is to the rest of their lives. So just if you'll permit me a rant for just 1 second to the young people. The root, I would say, the most common problem I see in this, which I really want to warn you against, is when you are looking for love and intimacy, which you should have, and it is not a false desire, it's not a bad thing to desire. For the love of God, don't look for a boy or girl to satisfy you. Don't look for another man or woman to satisfy the deepest longing of your heart. The only person that can do that is Jesus Christ. And if you expect another person to do that for you, you are putting a burden on that person they are not able to fulfill, and they will only make your relationship worse. Yes, there will be happy moments, and then there are going to be a lot worse moments. If you use someone as a drug, do not use other people, in a romantic sense particularly, simply because you are lonely. Cultivate good, healthy friendships. I know family life can be difficult. You need to work on your family relationships. Hopefully parents are working on those relationships. But you need to develop friendships. Do not look for romance as your solution. You will only end up being miserable, and you're going to make a whole bunch of other people miserable as well. Now, I'm going to keep going, but I would encourage anyone who needs to talk about this to please let me know, because I am telling you, it is the most common illness that I experience in all of my pastoral counseling and confessions. Now, to solve this situation, what God does is he forms woman from the rib of Adam, as we're all familiar. He takes the rib from Adam while he sleeps. The breath of the living ones, which God puts in the flesh of Adam, which he breathes into the flesh of Adam, is shared through his flesh, through his humanity. It's shared with Eve because of the rib, and then it's shared with everybody else by propagation. We have life because it is passed on in the flesh. Now, this is extremely important theologically. This idea of all of us sharing the breath of the living ones because we are united to Adam's flesh. We are his flesh and blood. As you know, Christ is the new Adam. As you know, the church is his mystical body. That is because the way God designed things in the beginning was to be fulfilled in Christ. Adam is the head of humanity, and we are part of his corporate person, the body of Adam in our humanity. And it is because of that that we inherit original sin, because that enmity that Adam puts against God, which we'll talk about next week, is passed on in the human life that is passed on. And that we are members of Christ and saved by being members of Christ's mystical body. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit more next time. And then Moses, in his comments right after this, saying, and this is why a man will leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. I guess I could at this point also talk about mother-in-laws, but we don't have time for that. These foundational chapters are again teaching us what God's intention for creating us male and female is. Our sex, which is the proper word for what humans have, not this whole gender ideology, not even the word gender, okay? The two sexes that God created was for this purpose. And when you use something contrary to his purpose, you are going to ruin that thing. It's built into what it is. This union is sacred for two reasons. One, because it is how life is passed on. It's how human beings most participate in divine activity on the natural level, is through procreation. And secondly, this relationship is a reflection of the relationship between Christ and his church, as St. Paul says to the Ephesians. It's that reading that begins, wives should be submissive, and therefore no one listens to the rest of it. But the rest of the reading is very important, speaking of the fact that marriage is holy because of what it reflects. It is a reflection. It is not the highest ideal. But this is why marriage is so holy. And finally, Moses comments on this point that they were naked without shame. For those of you wondering what's going on, if you're going to watch this video, someone's snoring and we can all hear it. Maybe you can. So Moses comments that they were naked without shame. And this is a very important point, and it represents their real, sincere freedom without having to hide anything, without fear that they are going to be hurt by others when they are seen as they are. We'll talk about this a bit more next week and then further on. But just to conclude then, from Dr. Bergsma again, some Old Testament scholars argue that God's intention was for the perfect peace of the Garden of Eden to be protected by Adam and then advanced throughout the whole world. The work of Adam was to extend the peace of the garden throughout the whole creation and extend his dominion over all creation. Eden is ultimately heaven. The earthly Eden was transitory because it is merely an anticipation of the heavenly Eden. And this is an ancient understanding among Christians. It's not talked about a lot because, especially in the last couple of decades, the first 3 chapters of Genesis are pushed aside and dismissed. And so the idea of Eden, but it's going to be very important. Just to share a sample text of what I'm talking about, from a sermon by St. John Damascene on the Dormition, which is how the Greeks refer to the Assumption of Our Lady, her falling asleep. He says on that feast day, "This day the Eden of the new Adam receives the living garden of delight, wherein the condemnation was annulled, wherein the tree of life was planted, wherein our nakedness was covered." So again, he's speaking about Our Lady going to heaven. So this day the Eden of the new Adam, so Christ being the new Adam, so this is heaven, receives the living garden of delight. That would be Mary. So again, this is an ancient understanding, and you see it if you follow the line that we've followed from the burial of Adam in Eden, where Eden was located, to the new temple, or the temple, to Christ's sacrifice and resurrection, to the new temple prophesied with the stream coming out of it in the Apocalypse of St. John, which is pointing towards heaven. Why there is no earthly Eden anymore and what God is going to do about it is what we'll consider next week.